Hello and welcome, I'm Steel4 Speaks, and this is my Fab New Player Hero Guide series. It's an entire playlist where we go through every single hero in the game, and we just ask the simple question, are they good for new players? We review them on mechanics, accessibility and depth, and we try and give an overall feeling of how they play, so that you who are watching this will have a good understanding of whether or not that might be a hero that you would like to pick up. Now, aesthetics are huge in the game, so if you like the look of a hero, it might be one that's worth playing, even if they don't match up with your playstyle preference exactly, just because you're going to love looking at the cards. There's a whole playlist associated with this video that goes through most of the heroes in the game and gives them similar rankings. Some of the videos are old, some of them are new. These really are timeless videos. If you're looking for a up-to-date like meta deck list, this isn't that. This is a, hey, you're new, is this hero for you kind of guide. So if that's what you want, then let's dive straight in. Verdance Thorn of the Roses is an Earth Wizard hero from the Rosetta set launched in September of 2024. Verdance loves her fair Candlehold as much as she loves the eternal summer that lingers within its leafy embrace. Candlehold is one of the regions of Aria that is a giant forest with lightning crystals and lots of nature themes. From the moment she could walk, she felt the heartbeat of the glade beneath her feet, her attunement to nature as deep-rooted as Candlehold's oldest trees. Raised by the Rosetta, which is the soldiers in Candlehold, Verdance developed into an influential wizard with the power to heal all of Candlehold's flora, its flowers, vines, leaves, and weeds, so that the realm may experience a warm and stable life forevermore. Verdance takes her responsibility seriously and will harness her arcane abilities to stop her beloved home from falling into decay. And the whole Rosetta set is based around this idea of growth and decay on the earth side of things anyway, with both aspects being presented in the earth element, and Florian, who's the Runeblade, takes the opposite side of that, which is decay. So you can look at him if that's the sort of thing you're more interested in autumn rather than spring and summer, for example. So, Verdance is an elemental wizard hero and a refresher for new players. Elemental is a talent, wizard is a class. You can include all elemental cards in your deck, you can include all wizard cards in your deck, and all elemental wizard cards in your deck. You cannot include, for example, Shadow Wizard if that existed, as you do not have the shadow keyword. You have to match everything. She also has the Essence of Earth, which is an elemental specific feature. Elemental heroes have an essence, which also says what sort of elemental cards they can include. In this case, Earth cards, which you find just like a talent in the bottom of the card. If there are more than 8 Earth cards, if there are 8 or more Earth cards in your banished zone, Verdance gets, whenever you gain life, that's a life symbol, during your turn, you may deal 1 arcane damage to an opposing target. So as a quick refresher, arcane damage is just not attack damage. So it's a specific type of damage that exists in the game that tends to resolve when the ability that is creating it resolves. So for instance, in this case, you will play something that gains you life. It doesn't matter how much life you gain. You gain 3 life, 1 arcane damage, 5 life, 1 arcane damage. Once you've gained the life, you gain the arcane. You do the arcane, and when the arcane resolves, if your opponent does not do something that stops the arcane damage, you will have dealt them 1 arcane damage. They'll lose 1 life, and then you essentially have dealt them 1 arcane damage this turn in case there's an effect that checks against that. Her signature weapon, Staff of Verdance, shoots. Once per turn action, 3 resources, amp 1, go again. Amp is a keyword that features heavily in Rosetta, where Verdance is the set that Verdance is in. And it just says the next time you would deal arcane damage this turn, instead deal that much plus 1. And that applies to any arcane effect, but it just is the next arcane effect that turn. When 1 or more Earth cards are pitched this way, the next time you deal arcane damage this turn, create an Embodiment of Earth token. And we'll talk about Embodiment of Earth in a minute. But basically, for 3 resources, this gives your next arcane effect plus 1. And if it hits, you get this Embodiment of Earth token. Then, of course, the next keyword that's very relevant is called Decompose. And if you look at Felling of the Crown here, you'll see, firstly, it's got an ability that triggers from Earth cards being in the banished zone, which is often the power of Earth cards. They get more powerful the more is in the banished zone, kind of like a ramp-up effect. And Decompose reads, when this attacks, you may banish 2 Earth cards and an action card from your graveyard. If you do, each hero puts a card from their hand at the bottom of their deck. So the Decompose part of this ability is that first sentence. All the Decompose abilities have this requirement, so when you attack you can banish 2 earth cards and an action card from your graveyard if you do, and then the if you do part is the part that's specific to felling the crown, so that's where the ability will change for other decompose abilities. It's important to note that the 2 earth cards can be any type of card, and the action card can also be an earth card, so you can banish 3 earth cards with this ability, but the first 2 can be anything like an instant or a defense reaction, for example, and then you could banish a 3rd earth action or any other kind of action. You have to be able to banish all 3 cards to get the effect. The third keyword to be aware of is Perennial Ether Bloom. So this is an example of an arcane damage card. When you resolve this card, you will deal 3 arcane damage to the opposing hero, unless they do something like Arcane Barrier or Spell Void to stop you. It also has the Surge keyword. Now, Surge is if this deals more than 3 damage, and the damage for the Surge effect is always the damage that's printed on the card. So if this was the blue version of this card, it would say this deals more than 1 damage, for example. So whatever the damage written on the top of the card is, that's what the Surge effect will be. So basically it's saying if you've given this a buff and it's hit for the full amount or enough of the full amount, then it will give you the Surge effect. And what this one does is just go on the bottom of its deck, so it recycles itself. And it's a 0 for 3 useful ability. So how does Verdance play? And I think that's an interesting question to answer, because there's still sort of some debate about it. So there is a combo version of Verdance, which is a bit complex, where you're basically trying to stack life gain effects, because she has a Majestic that says amp for as much life as you have gained this turn. And then she also has big attack actions like felling the crown that she can play as well. So there are 2 real styles of playing Verdance at the moment. There's this inevitable combo, I'm going to put out healing potions and things like this, build up to a situation where I can do amp 30 with another weapon called Surging Ether Tide, and essentially deal 60 damage to my opponent in 1 turn. And there's another version of Verdance which is kind of more mid-range, where you're playing these big earth attacks that have powerful effects, and you're doing a little bit of arcane stuff in between just to disrupt, add a bit more power. And I think you can play it either way. Again, this isn't a meta video, but that's kind of a 2 styles. So she's set up to be sort of like a battle mage, where she's playing big attacks and doing arcane. But of course, people have found combos that work where she deals a lot more arcane. So if you want a mix of battle mage attacking style plus option to combo, then that's the sort of thing you're going to get from Verdance. Earth heroes are also quite good at defending. So we mentioned Embodiment of Earth, and this is what Embodiment of Earth is. Non-attack action cards you control get +1 while defending. And as you might imagine, most wizard cards are non-attack actions. So, for example, Pulsing Ether Life will block for 4 with an Embodiment of Earth in play. So there is a gameplay style as well where you can just defend a lot. You can create a lot of Embodiments of Earth, use all your wizard actions to block really well, and then just try and do arcane over the top and beat your opponent that way. So that appeals to you, kind of like a more defensive mid-range style, then Earth could be for you. But if you're not thinking wizard, you could also look at Florian, who's another Earth hero, who is a rune blade, who also has some of that defensive capability, but is a bit more focused on attacking rather than arcane damage. The other thing to talk about, of course, in Rosetta was the introduction of meld cards. Meld cards are essentially 2 card on 1, and you can play either half of the card or both, and the cost of each card is equal to the cost in the top right corner. So if you want to play both, you have to spend 1 resource on each, so 2 resources total, or you can spend 1/2 for 1 resource and handle it that way. The way these resolve is that you just declare which ones you're playing. You have to, of course, have the ability to play the card that you're playing. So, for instance, to play the wizard action, the left-hand side of this card, it has to be your turn. You have to have an action point, whereas you can play the earth instant whenever you like. And the other thing to remember is, of course, the instant resolves first. So it resolves right to left. And the reason that is because you play the action and then you layer the instant on top of it. So the instant will always resolve before the action. So just think, have to pay both costs if I want to play both. So it's whatever the multiple of the top right-hand corner is. And then think, okay, the right-hand side resolves first, and you'll see your way around meld. So what do we think in terms of Verdance for new players? And unfortunately, she's only gotten a 2-star rating in terms of new players. The first reason for that is arcane damage. Arcane damage adds a layer of complexity to learning the game that I think is a bit off-putting for new players. Firstly, it feels a bit oppressive because it can only be stopped with specific cards and abilities. And if you haven't set up for it in that way, then you really can't interact with it and it can feel a bit unpleasant. And also just trying to figure out how to get arcane damage through when your opponent could block all that damage. I mean, if you're playing against a wizard, a lot of people will play Arcane Barrier 3. So if you're coming in for 3 damage, they will just block it. And it's not like an attack where the values are a lot higher and you can come in for 8 or you get go again. You can come in for 4s and 4s and 4s. It is easy enough to block arcane damage unless you're comboing, so that's a bit different. She also features a lot of cards called sigils, which it's uncertain how many she'll play in a meta deck, but they do give her sort of permanent management effects, which is a bit cool, but also a bit more complicated, so we don't really rate that highly. Also, she's got life gain, and life gain is obviously something that provides a cushion for a new player, but I think one of the problems in Fab is that it doesn't help you win the game. So you have to use her life gain quite specifically, or it's not going to get you into a position where you can win the game. Whereas other decks are easy to learn because most of the cards help you get across the finish line. Most of the cards help you win the game. And life gain doesn't do that. You have to use it in specific ways too. So I think that really is a bit more complicated as well. I feel like her hybrid gameplay as well makes deck building difficult, makes mechanics difficult. It's really hard for a new player to understand how many attacks to play, when to attack, when to play arcane damage. I mean, it's just a bit too many layers for a new player to find accessible. The last part is, of course, ramping power. So you're not going to start off full powered. Her ability isn't even going to start off on. So a new player has to understand not to waste all of their big resources at the start of the game and really wait until the ramp has come into effect. And I feel like that itself is also a bit of a problem too, because it requires patience and it requires people to not do the most powerful thing they can possibly do, because actually later on it's going to be more important to do those powerful things. Accessibility, I've given her 3 stars. I feel like on the base of it, if someone handed you a Verdance deck and it wasn't the combo, if it was just like battle Verdance with a lot of attack actions and some arcane damage, you could probably play the deck fairly easily. I think it's fairly easy to understand. I think the complexity comes in from the deck building, and I think deck building for her isn't something I would put towards a new player. I feel like that makes it a bit inaccessible. And it's part of the reason why she's lost a lot of stars on accessibility, because I think ultimately if she had a straightforward deck, you'd play it, it'll be fine. But I feel like getting that deck when you're handed a pile of cards or a blitz deck is going to be difficult. But if this is sounding like the sort of thing you're interested in, then of course, by the time you're watching this video, there might be deck lists you can copy. There might be templates that you can follow to have a good deck without having to put in a lot of the work. And then eventually you will learn how to customize it. And the third thing I think that influences accessibility is just how slowly the power develops. I think that is just a barrier to enjoying Fab in the second a game starts, which a lot of Fab's enjoyment to a new player is that the fact the game starts at full power and you get to dive straight in. That isn't true for Earth Heroes, and I feel like for a new player I wouldn't recommend it, because I feel like that does not reflect what Fab should be like, whereas turn 1 is good and turn 1 is impactful, and Earth Heroes play along a slightly different axis. Is it worth it long term? It is. Then in terms of depth, I've given her 3 stars. So she does have combo, which would add her depth a bit higher. But I will say that she feels very solvable. So it feels like the ratios of attacks she's going to run versus non-attacks, the ratios of arcane damage, which arcane to include. It's a very straightforward equation that someone's going to solve. And once someone does, like when someone gets the right number of ratio of decompose and attack and all these other abilities, the deck is going to be solved and it's not going to be as fun as people think it is. And I think the same is true with the combos. The combo exists, but it can be countered quite specifically if people know what they're looking for, or people can kill you before you get it set up. So I feel like it doesn't necessarily lead to a fun gameplay experience. I feel like it can be solved. I also feel like the ramp experience is quite repetitive rather than having a lot of depth. Like you are essentially just filling your graveyard, banishing cards to turn on her ability, and that's going to be your game plan for the first 4 or 5 turns of the game, every single turn, every single game. So that is quite repetitive. It will lead to a lot of early game blocking, trying to get your decomposed cards out. I feel like that's going to be a fairly repetitive pattern, so I don't think that adds depth. And I think I've already kind of said this in terms of the solvability, but I feel like optimal ratios for her deck will be found, and I feel like that will just affect how fun it is to play and build this hero long term. I feel like that doesn't mean you can't take her to a tournament. I just feel like there's not going to be a lot of fodder in this deck in the future. And I feel like I may be proven wrong, but I think that's what I'm thinking at the moment. So that's Verdance. Again, this like Battle Mage, Earth, big attack slinging, arcane attack slinging wizard. If that sounds like your jam, take a bit of a deeper look. But I feel like she doesn't get the best of scores. She's all right for new players because I think you can grasp her and you can dive in, and she's not like super complicated. But I feel like she is a bit hard to reach on the mechanics. She is a bit hard to reach accessibility wise, and I feel like the depth maybe isn't there for this hero. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend her for a new player, but I wouldn't say she's terrible for a new player either. She comes in completely in the middle of the range with 3 stars. I, however, come in with 6 stars from all these new heroes because, of course, I think my content's great, and I think you'd like my content as well. I have been making Fab content now for 5 years, and I believe that I am a great source of discussions from the player's perspective on the game. What does from the player's perspective mean? It means that I'm always asking the question, is this good for us? Is this good for the players? You know, is that event too expensive? Was that disqualification of a player by a judge fair? You know, is this later set power crept? Is that ban a good idea? All of these questions with the perspective of, are the company making good decisions to make your experience as a player the best? And if they're not, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what they could do instead or what could be better. Thanks a lot for listening, and I will speak to you all very, very soon.